What did the president know, and when did he know it?
That was, of course, Senator Howard Baker's famous quote from the Watergate hearings in 1973, which ultimately brought down President Richard Nixon. Now, with investigations looming, many are asking the same question of the current occupant of the White House, President Donald Trump. Recent comparisons between the two presidents prompted this cartoon in the latest edition of The New Yorker, with the ghost of Richard Nixon telling Trump, "It's time we have a little chat." Anyway, veteran TV anchor and reporter Dan Rather recently commented on the parallels between Watergate and what we're seeing today. Quote, "Watergate is the biggest political scandal of my lifetime until maybe now. On a 10 scale of Armageddon for our form of government, I would put Watergate at 9. This Russia scandal is currently somewhere around 5 or 6, in my opinion. But it is cascading in intensity seemingly by the hour." I'm joined right now by author John Dean, former White House counsel in the Nixon administration, as well as Richard Ben-Viniste, former Watergate assistant special prosecutor. Mr. Dean. Hello. Residents, echo, whatever, or denial, or nothing's the same. Where do you stand?
Well, I see some interesting parallels. Obviously, the Russian break-in was a little different than the Watergate break-in itself. It was a hacking versus a bungled bugging and ransacking of the files. But they obviously deal both with the DNC, and I think that's where the comparison comes from, Chris. And from there's clear cover-ups going on. I mean, no one's coming forward and confessing any of this, and that's what, of course, we had in Watergate.
Yeah, and I was thinking, Richard, that I don't think Watergate had much impact on the campaign in '70. It was a swamp for Nixon, but he won it all, basically. But this time around, I'm not sure. I think some of the disruption of the DNC, the Palmieri thing, the Podesta letter, all that stuff, I know it was at least a dirty trick, like tying up the telephone lines or hiring all the buses some weekend. They were screwing up their operation.
But here, you've got a foreign power, our adversary, the Russians, who are interfering, according to the unified version of our intelligence community, interfering with our election, with our electoral process. So that's big. So the question is, was Mr. Trump, now President Trump, or any of his close associates somehow involved with the Russians during this course of conduct? And if so, then that would be huge.
Is it impeachable at this point? Can you have retrospective impeachment for something done before you take office?
If there was, and that's a humongous big if there was such activity, then this would be a criminal act.
So it'd be a high crime and misdemeanor, right?
Conspiracy that would be of the utmost seriousness to this country.
It'd be a crime. Okay. Now, much like Trump, Nixon's disdain for the mainstream media was made clear on a regular basis back then, including this 1973 press conference.
What is it about the television coverage of you in these past weeks and months that has so aroused your anger?
Don't get the impression that you arouse my anger.
You see, I have that impression.
You see, one can only be angry with those he respects.
Well, how British of him. Anyway, but Nixon went further in his private conversations, calling the press the enemy. Let's listen.
Remember, we're going to be around and outlive our enemies. And also, never forget, the press is the enemy. The press is the enemy.
Well, he repeats himself. Trump does that. Anyway, similarly, President Trump has regularly attacked the credibility of the news media, tweeting on just this past Friday, "The fake news media, failing New York Times, NBC News, ABC News, CBS, and CNN, is not my enemy. It is the enemy of the American people." John Dean, your thoughts on this comparison between the two media haters?
What's interesting is that Nixon was typically much more bitter and aggressive behind closed doors. Trump is very aggressive right out in public. That's the difference in their style. And Nixon kind of worked behind the scenes to see if he couldn't hurt the press. He kept his enemies list. He had surveillance on something like, I guess, about a dozen newsmen at one point. He has his plumber squad that's out looking for leaks and leads to great disasters later. So that's the difference. So far, Trump has just been right out front, even taking it to the degree of a press conference where he openly attacks the media in the press conference.
You know, nobody I've read in history, you got to always make the Hitler exception, thinks they're bad. From their internal perception, the way they look at the world, even the bad guys think they're good guys. Okay, so my question to you, John D., because you really worked for Nixon, you knew him in the first part of that second part of that, first part of the second part of the administration, near the end. What was Nixon's big goal? To be the to be on this list of great presidents? Is that what it was? What is as basic as that?
Peacemaker. That's what he wanted. He really didn't care much about domestic affairs. He spent his full time and focus on foreign affairs. And that's what he envisioned his presidency to be, and that's what he hoped the success of his presidency would be.
What do you see? Can you see, Richard, what this guy wants?
I see on-the-job
Peacemaker,
training.
he says, I'm going to get rid of ISIS and bring peace to the Middle East.
Richard Nixon, say what you will about him, was eminently prepared to be president of the United States.
You know who said that? My old boss, Tip O'Neill. Nobody was ever more prepared, he said, than Nixon.
Well, 8 years as vice president, member of the House for years, senator. This is on-the-job training for President Trump, and one can only hope that he utilizes the vast resources that are available to the President of the United States, and to pick people who will say no to him. This is what was Nixon's downfall. He surrounded himself by people who catered to his dark side.